Greetings, children. Today I wanted to explain the steps in finding correlations for the Research Methods survey project. And so I want to walk you through kind of what this is that we're doing and why we're doing it. The first thing you're going to want to do from your survey is you're going to figure out which questions you actually want to kind of compare the answers to. Some questions are going to work for correlation calculation, and others they're not going to work. And you want to think again about what was the whole point of your survey in the first point. You're asking certain questions because you're probably making some assumptions, or you have some curiosities about what some causes or what some effects might be. So when you go to your survey, you had the part where you could write the questions themselves. Okay. And you can see on this particular survey, almost everything, except for at the very end, is at a scale of 1 to 5. And there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, hopefully now you've got at least 15 responses from your peers to the survey. And so when you go to responses, you get some question summaries looking at your results as a whole. And in this case, you can see mine are kind of set up as these bar graphs, or this question has sub-questions that are set up as bar graphs. But everything's being spit out on that scale of 1 to 5. Okay. Once you've kind of identified which questions you think there might be a relationship, for instance, this first one, teacher's knowledge and command of the subject matter. Is there a relationship with students' perceptions of the teacher's knowledge of the subject matter with, let's see, students' attitudes about, these sub-questions are kind of stuff, but their responses to the statement, I put in a considerable amount of time outside of class reviewing for assessments. Let's just say their attitudes about how much the teacher knows and their self-report on how much they prepare. Maybe there's a meaningful relationship between those two items. Now these are helpful because they're all numerical responses. It's really a value, logical value between each of the following. I had these open-ended questions here at the bottom. Oh, these are the responses here. Hold on, we'll go back to questions. Open-ended questions at the bottom, these are not going to give me numbers. Okay, I could ask questions that might generate some numbers, like strongly agree through strongly disagree, but these don't work. Another one of these when you have categorical questions. So basically the respondent has to put themselves into a group. A good giveaway here is if you've got pie charts, like multiple choice, that will often sort people out. And if the groups that they put themselves into aren't logically numerical, like has a greater value than another one, then you can't use those for correlations. Probably the grimmest example here is if you asked demographic questions about race and ethnicity. Those groups don't have a logical numerical value between them. It isn't that one group is a 1 and the other group is a 2 mathematically. It just doesn't make sense. So those types of questions, open-ended or categorical, you're not going to be able to use those for correlations. You want questions where there is a logical, increasing value amongst the responses that they give. So another one, how often would you say you engage in this behavior? You could let them type in a number, or you could say never, rarely, sometimes, often, or always. Now, those choices are similar to these, as one is very little, the other is a whole lot. There's a natural value between those. So once you've figured out which two questions you want to compare, you've got to be able to look at individual results for your respondents. You need to see how each person answered those two particular items. And to do that in your form, it's pretty simple. You just go to responses, and you can either go to individual. So now I've got 25 respondents, and I can see how my first respondent answered these two questions. Okay? Let's say these are the two that I picked, just for simplicity. And I can see that this person said average, this person said excellent. So again, we want these to be numerical values, and so this, this is a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5. So when it came to these two questions, you could say their answers were a 3 and a 5. The other way that you can get individual results, and some of you might prefer this instead of scrolling through the students, is right here is this spreadsheet logo. And again, I'm under responses, and you'll see this spreadsheet logo. If you click on this, it's going to ask you if you want to create a new spreadsheet, and you say create. And then it's going to open up a new tab. And look, I've got each respondent's answers to these questions. And so what you might do, say you wanted to look at question C and question F, maybe it's easier for you just to kind of, get your first 15 or 20 respondents. I'll get all of mine right here. I'm just going to go copy. I'm just going to throw it down here and paste. So I got all the responses to C, and maybe I wanted to do E, right? So I'm going to click and drag and get all of those. Again, copy. I'll go down here next to it and paste. Okay? So I have the responses to the first question we're looking at and the responses to the second question that they're looking at. All right? So now we're going to use a correlation calculator. It's a website, and the link has been posted in Classroom under the final project. You'll see it right there. And when you open up this correlation calculator, a pretty basic site, it just has this little box that we're going to enter X, Y values, and it says numbers only. Okay, so I can't take my data and enter excellent, comma, below average. I have to convert these to their number values again. And so, excellent was a 5. I think below average was a 2. I think there was something well above average. Yeah, there's an excellent and above average. Okay, so we'll say below average was a 1. Ouch, thanks, kid. So a 5 and a 1. What I would do then in this correlation calculation window would put a 5, a comma, a 1, and hit return and start a new line. Then I would go to my next respondent. So average was a 3, excellent was a 5. So I'll go into my correlation calculator, 3, 5. And if you're working with partners, someone can kind of just call out these pairs as you plug them in. I'll need to go ahead and put at least 5 values in here. You guys are going to put one for each of the first 15 that you have. Okay, so we'll go back in here, and we've got a 4 and a 5. And again, the whole point of doing this is just seeing, is there a relationship between how people answered the first question and how they answered the second question. So a 4 and a 1. Oops. 4 and a 3. It's a tough crowd on this teacher evaluation form. Okay, so I got at least 5. Remember, you're going to do this for each of the first 15 of your respondents. You can do more, and that would mean that your data would theoretically be more accurate. You got to do at least 15. So now I'm going to hit submit the data, and the first thing this thing is going to spit out to me is what's called a correlation coefficient. We also call this an R value. Remember, this is just measuring how strong is the link between how predictable is the link between how people answered the first question and how people answered the second question. The weakest correlations are going to be closest to the value of 0. Stronger correlations are going to be closer to either positive 1 or negative 1. The negative just means as one increases, the other tends to decrease. And that tendency here is pretty strong. Anything 0.5 or higher, or negative 0.5 or lower, you consider that a pretty considerable correlation. So this one's fairly strong. And what I would do for this is I'm just going to copy and I'm going to paste this into here for correlation 1. And I could copy and paste my questions as my X and Y, just so when I look at your form, I can see which sort of things were being compared. So I've got my correlation, I got my questions. Okay, so again, we've got the correlation, we've got the X and the Y, if you will. We need a graph of the correlation. So we go back to the calculator and select linear regression. So this is kind of a scatter plot, but it also kind of has this line of best fit. It takes a second. And so your slope is similar to your R value. So a positive correlation, you would see the line going this direction. A negative correlation, you see it going this direction. And the points of data, because I only have so many options as far as what people could choose, there's really just 5, and the responses were somewhere between 3 and 5 and 1 and 5. You can see there's not a lot of scatter plot there. But it does kind of give you a general trend of what things look like. As one increases, the other one tends to decrease. Now I like this line in my assignment, so I'm going to hold down Command Shift 4. Again, that was Command Shift and 4 together. And notice my cursor now comes to this little crosshair, and I click and I drag and I let go, and you can see it kind of pops up over here. It's going to show up on my desktop. So I'm going to go back to my assignment. There's my screenshot. I guess that's out of your guys' view. I'm going to drag it back in here for my desktop. Voila, there it is. So that's how you do a correlation. You've got an R value, you've identified your X's and your Y's, and you have a graph. The big question is, what does this mean? What does it mean that there's a strong correlation between these two questions? So as somebody tends to score me higher in content knowledge, they also tend to score me lower when it comes to handling students' questions and opinions. What sort of conclusions can we make from that? I don't know. My feelings are kind of hurt, so I'll probably just go in a corner and cry about it for a while. But hopefully I can come to some conclusion about what does it all mean. You don't need to have a high correlation to learn something here. The strongest correlation, you could have a 0.01 in your correlation coefficient, and that's actually super useful because it would say, hey, you might have assumed that there was a relationship here, but the data does not support that assumption. So go ahead and crunch those numbers, make sure you get your charts filled out, do all these good things, but you also need to think about what can we learn from this number crunching about how strong, seemingly strong or weak, the connection is between people's responses to two different items. All right, this is the first video I made this way, so hopefully it turns out well, and hopefully you guys are able to get this done without me. Good luck.